Hey everyone, I hope you're doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. In this video, I have more strange and bizarre encounters that I hope you'll love. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So this isn't my story. I read it in a newspaper actually, and I still remember it to this day. So, in my country, we often get newspapers and newspaper stories from Russia, and this is one of those. So basically the scene, it's a rural cold island that's north of Russia. The author of the story is a child, and he's playing with his friends. They had a hobby at the time of going out to the local graveyard. They would chip off pieces of gravestones and set them on fire for that pretty blue flame that they produce. Already, this is not a great thing to do, and it's probably not a good sign of things to come. So one day, they do their usual collecting in the graveyard. They hear somebody walking over to them. All three of the friends rush up a tree. They try to hide and stay quiet in the branches. It's an old woman. She's clothed in gray. She's carrying two heavy sacks. She walks right up to the tree that they are in, and then suddenly, one of his friends drops the box of matches that he was holding. It makes a noise as it falls. The old woman looks straight up at them, and instead of her face, there's nothing. She has no face, and then vanishes into thin air. The tracks that she left behind vanish as well. That part alone made me mortally scared of going anywhere near a graveyard. I had to cycle through one regularly when I was visiting my grandma's village. The next part of the story goes like this. Both of the other friends that were with the author have died. One from illness. The other was thrown off a bridge into a river by his mates when celebrating the end of school, and he fell on a sharp rock and crashed. The author then narrowly avoided death himself when he was walking down the street and a TV fell out of a window 9 stories above him. Evidently, it seems that everybody who was involved in this is cursed. I have this weird story. I work at a Subway, the food place, not the transport, downtown. So Subway has surveillance cameras that are pretty much everywhere around the restaurant. The monitors were in the back rooms. Basically, you used to spy on your coworkers and keep an eye on customers in case they needed anything. So, the alarm sounds in the back when the front doors are opened, so we are alerted when a customer comes in. So this happened a few months ago. I had just finished helping this really obnoxious family. They go sit and eat and be loud and obnoxious. I go back and I finish doing the dishes. And then the door alarm beeps. The restaurant goes silent. I assume that the family has left, but a minute or two later, I glance at the monitor to check on the other customers. The family that's loud and obnoxious is still there, but they're sitting silently and not moving. The camera flips to behind the counter on the other side of the restaurant. There's not much out of the ordinary, but then it flips to the other front door. There's something standing there. It looks like a kid from the high school. It has a backpack and normal clothes, but it's completely black, with black hair covering its face, and its knees are bent the totally wrong way. I think, what the hell is that? I flip back to the family, sitting silently and staring at the thing that's just standing there. I let the camera go for another cycle, and then I hear the door beep again. The family gets loud again. I go out front. Everything is normal. That thing, whatever it was, is gone. But all of the veggies up front are suddenly rotting. The bread is stale and the meat smells spoiled. We had to change out pretty much everything. And when I mentioned it to one of my coworkers, he basically said, "Oh, that's weird," and shrugged it off. So I'm probably dating myself here, but this took place back in the early 80s. I had a temp job. I was working as an archaeologist assistant for the Bureau of Land Management in Lander, Wyoming. Lander didn't have a lot to do, so one weekend I drive over to Casper. The first thing I noticed while going to the bars there was that, hey, they don't only play country western music. So I spend most of my Saturday chatting with a hottie. The bar closes, but things don't go the way I would have liked with the girl. So after saying our goodbyes, I get back in my car and I start driving back to Lander. This was a bad decision. It was very late and I was very tired. Eventually, I decided that it would be smart to pull off the highway and get some sleep. A hotel wasn't really an option at this point. That part of the world is still barely populated. I end up in a rest area. I pull into a parking spot. I set my parking brake and I go to sleep. Now, note the pull right into the parking spot. That's important. So later on, I am jolted awake by the sensation of my car rocking. I assume that I'm rolling and I grab the parking brake, but it's already set. The car stops rocking. I get out, confused. It's a clear night with a full moon. I'm looking around, and while I'm doing this, I notice something very weird. Remember how I pulled straight into the parking spot? The problem is, now I'm pointed the wrong way. I would have had to back in when I parked. My car is flipped 180 degrees. I get back in my car. I'm wide awake, and there's no point of trying to get some sleep now. So I get back on the road, and I drive all the way to Lander. Over the next few days, I consider my options. Was it an earthquake? There was none recorded, and it sure seemed unlikely that one would have so precisely relocated my car, specifically 180 degrees. Was it some drunk local boys screwing with an out-of-stater? Maybe, but I had my parking brake on. They sure would have had to clear out in a hurry after I got out of my car. There was no sign of anyone around. Somebody slipped something into my drink when I was in the bar. I thought that could be the most likely, only I had no other symptoms besides the specific event in the rest area. I shrugged it off as that was weird, and then I got on with my life. But the next week that followed this was so strange. Things that I knew I completed at work were still pending. The boss recalls conversations with me that I don't remember, that I was never a part of. And not only that, there were new people in the office that I don't remember seeing before, but others say that they have been there for years. Likewise, some people that I knew at the office and were friends with weren't there any longer, and nobody else remembered them. I honestly don't think that I'm in the same universe that I lived in for the first 20-some years of my life. So I suck at telling stories, and I'm not the best writer, but try to bear with me. This is a couple stories from my childhood. You can believe and discount whatever you want, I don't really care. But before I start, I have to give some context about my circumstances for some things to make sense. I was somewhere around 14 years old during this one. I was a dumbass and gullible, trusting kid. I didn't have very many friends because I had severe social anxiety from years of bullying. I lived in South Central America in a calm, middle-class neighborhood. My maternal grandparents lived way out in the middle of nowhere on a chicken farm. My paternal grandparents lived downtown in a weird section of older housing. Back in elementary school, I went to a magnet program in a similarly special academy in middle school because I was a bit of an artist, and I had my theater dreams crushed there. Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. Oh, and thanks, Mrs. Lecomte. Those two destroyed any kind of motivation I had to do better. But my mom was semi-religious and took us to church every Sunday at this local place. I also had my Girl Scout meetings there. We eventually joined a different church after the troop leader moved back to Georgia, and the church that we settled at then is the church that I still go to this very day. I had amazing youth pastors there, but they eventually moved away as well, which made the church start to suck, and for a while my faith began to falter. So Daniel and Kevin, you guys were real bros. I had 2 dogs named Katie and Janie. Katie died of old age when I was around 6. Jane died of a brain tumor not a year later. I got a new dog, Doofy Doo, and then Milo a couple years later. Both of them are still with me today, and they're the light of my life. So now that you get the gist of my situation and my circumstances, this is what happened in this particular story. I was talking to some of my peers in the classroom about whatever we were talking about. I was struggling to look them in the eye. I was staring at the wall behind them instead. And then suddenly I see something. It's an old-looking guy in a gray-brown striped suit. And I think, what the hell is that? Where did he come from? He has these long, spindly fingers that are clasped together in front of his chest. His skin is a molted, ashy gray color with discolored spots all over his skin, like liver spots. His eyes are glassy and pure black, like some really screwed up doll. He's grinning at me with a mouth of far too many crooked and yellow teeth. He's making a soft clicking noise in the back of his throat. He's obviously bald, a top hat covering his greasy-looking, shiny head. His body was shriveled and twisted unnaturally, and he stood unevenly, his shoulders uneven, and his legs bowed. The worst thing about him, though, was his neck. It was gnarled and deformed, twisting around itself several times, like ivy growing around a pole. His head was situated on his neck crookedly, and he peered at me with these beady black eyes. I was scared shitless. I began to cry. My classmate is confused and gets the teacher. The teacher asks me, "What's wrong?" I try to explain what I saw, but I'm just blabbing about a gray, crooked man type thing, and pointing where he was. The teacher looked where I pointed. He was gone. I'd go on to see what I dubbed as the Crooked Man for a while longer, always behind other kids my age, making that clicking noise and making weird gestures with his hands that were similar to sign language. Nobody else ever seemed to see him other than me. Even though he never said or did anything inherently threatening, I always had this feeling of absolute paralyzing fear whenever I would see him behind someone. All he did was stand there and grin and gesture with his hands. He'd occasionally caress the neck of the person that he was behind, really gently, almost teasingly. It was so bizarre. I stopped seeing him after a visit to my paternal grandmother. I told her about the Crooked Man, and she was convinced that it was a demon that was following me. She told me not to look him in the eye and ignore him the best I can. I did. It sort of helped, but he only truly went away when I was given a rosary and a vial of holy water from the Vatican a while later after a second incident. So yeah, I have no clue what the hell that thing wanted from me, or what it even was. If anyone has any insight, let me know. I'm pretty sure that my Abula was right, and that he was a demon. But then, why didn't he try to hurt or kill me? This has puzzled me for years, and I haven't seen it since then. I remember this one night. I was 8 years old. I woke up in my parents' bed. I think I must have fell asleep on the couch downstairs and had been carried up to bed, but all I remember is laying there alone. The hall light was on, and I heard the TV on downstairs, so I thought that my parents were still down there watching TV. So I enjoyed the huge bed to myself, their heavy, thick duvet covering me, freshly made bed that I could stretch out in. But then I noticed something, a lump on the bed next to me, and it shifted a bit as I stretched out. I also remember it moving. I thought it was just the dog, so I moved my little toes under the covers, but when I reached this lump, it was nothing but ice cold, like ice against the sole of my foot. I snatched it back quickly. Whatever was making the lump on the bed slid off the other side, but I heard nothing. I felt the cover being pulled as it moved, and I was frozen. What was in the bed with me, and does it know that I know it was there? I lay there for an eternity, ears open and my breathing light, trying to hear whatever it was on the floor. Or was it now under the bed? Was it waiting for me to move? I was so quiet that I could hear the TV clearly downstairs, but there was no show on. There was just a high-pitched ringing. The TV channel had ended for the night, so why were my parents not in bed? I sat up in bed, slowly, quietly, trying to disturb the huge bed as little as possible. I pulled the covers away so I could make the jump from the bed to the light of the hall. I could run downstairs and get my parents. I could make it. So I stood on the bed and I jumped. I ran so fast down the stairs and into the living room that I saw them. My parents were there, but they were frozen. They were staring at the TV, eyes wide open, mouths wide open. They were frozen still, and I could feel it behind me, at the top of the stairs, looking at me, whatever it was. I turned around, and all I could see was its huge, black, glassy eyes. All I could hear was the TV. When I woke up, I was outside my house. I was in the yard, and the weirdest thing about it was how nonchalant my parents were about everything that happened. They just thought I was sleepwalking, but I was 8 years old. I had never sleptwalked before or after that. They didn't seem to even care that I woke up in the yard. They seemed to be off in a haze. They don't even remember putting me to bed. So I'm not sure if most people have heard of the Glimmerman or Glimmer people, but I've seen a few stories of them. They're kind of like shimmering entities that resemble the predator alien, mostly when it's using its cloaking ability. So here's one story about it. This isn't mine. This is from a student from the University of Florida who was out hiking with his dog, Toby, on the Gainesville-Hawthorne State Trail. So, it was a weekday around 11 a.m., so there were very few people, just me and Toby, and all of a sudden, Toby froze. He just stood there with his ears perked up, his tail sticking straight out. He was staring into the trees like he saw something. So I asked him, "What did you see, Toby? What is it, boy?" At this point, Toby's demeanor started to change. He began to whimper and started pulling on the leash like he wanted out of there. I continued to look into the trees, trying to spot whatever it was that was scaring him. And that's when I saw it. It's very hard to describe, but the thing looked translucent, but not quite. It was in the shape of a human, but it was see-through. The thing that stood out most was the glowing yellow eyes. That was the only thing that wasn't clear, as crazy as it sounds. This thing looked like the alien from the Predator movies. It was standing on a large tree branch, hanging on by its right arm, and was looking directly at me and Toby. It slowly began to crouch down and tried to hide behind the trunk of the tree, like it noticed us noticing him. I don't know why I say him. I absolutely have no idea what the gender or sex of this strange creature could be. I was just mesmerized by this thing. I was just staring at it, trying to figure out what it was. I didn't want to take my eyes off it for fear that I might lose sight of it. This thing was so damn camouflaged that if I looked away, I might not be able to find it again. And then it moved. It swung through the trees effortlessly and made almost no sound. It would move a few trees away, freeze, and look back at us. I guess it was trying to determine if we were actually watching it or not. I got the feeling that this thing did not want to be seen. It would move, then freeze, crouch down, and put itself between us and the tree it was in. It would sit there for a few minutes, and then move again. I wanted to follow it, but everything in my body said not to, so I just watched it, and eventually it disappeared into the forest. Toby and I jogged back to the car, and I never really told anyone what I saw. To this day, I don't know what I witnessed. Was it an alien or something? I don't know. I was scared the day it happened, but at the same time, I was almost excited to see something like that. Toby and I went back there numerous times, and I'm not gonna lie, I hoped to see it again, but I never did. I thought that maybe I was the only one who had this type of encounter until I heard people talking about the Glimmerman. Well, I saw it, and now I tell anyone who will listen. Of course, most people think I'm crazy, but I don't really care. So I hope you enjoyed those encounters, and if you did, feel free to let me know which one stuck out to you, and to like the video and subscribe and share the video and all that great stuff. And if you would like to donate to the channel, there's links in the description below where you can do that if you would like to, and super thanks here on YouTube. Also down there is a link to an email where you can send your story in if you would like to. And with that, I hope you have a good week. And if you're wondering what the 3 H's of the channel are, they are happy, healthy, and hydrated. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching. I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you Friday.